everyone. My name's Liz Duncan and I'm going to be taking you through the lectures for MBA 5007, Managing Strategy and Innovation. Today we're going to work our way through Module A, so let's see what it is that we're going to be talking about today. We're going to learn about what we mean by a company strategy. So when we talk about a company strategy, what exactly is it that we're referring to? What is a sustainable competitive advantage? We're also going to have a look at the 5 basic strategic approaches that a firm can use to try and set it apart from its rivals. Apart from having a strategy, a company needs to have a viable business model, and we'll be having a look at what a viable business model actually does. As part of this strategy setting process, an organisation also needs to set both strategic and financial objectives. And we're going to have a look at both of these types of objectives and what a company needs to do in order to achieve operating excellence and to also implement its strategy efficiently. Finally today, we're going to have a look at the roles and responsibilities that a company's board of directors has in overseeing the strategic management process and the strategy setting process. So let's begin by asking the question, what is a strategy? A strategy is a set of actions that managers take that will allow them to outperform other companies such as their competitors, and that will result in the company achieving superior profitability as a result of something. We're going to have a look at this in a little bit more depth in the following slide. A strategy needs to answer several very important questions for a firm. For example, the strategy would answer the question, what is our present situation? So what's the current business environment that we're operating within? What are the industry conditions that we're operating within at the moment? What are our financial capabilities? We also need to answer as part of a strategy document where we want to go to from here. So we're at this point now and we want to go over to here. So how are we going to make that transition from this point to that point? So there's some of the things that we're going to be looking at as we will make our way through our module today. So by now you probably will have worked out that strategy is all about answering a bunch of questions. And it answers a whole lot of how questions for us, such as how are we going to position our firm in the marketplace? How are we going to attract customers? How are we going to compete against our rivals? How are we going to be able to achieve our performance targets? And how can we capitalise on the opportunities that present themselves in order to grow our business? And in this day and age, very importantly, an organisation needs to work out how it's going to be able to respond to the changing economic and market conditions that there are. So strategy is all about choice. It's about deciding to compete in a different way from our rivals that will make us stand out from our competitors. It's all about working out what actions are likely to be successful and what kind of business approaches are likely to result in our company being set apart from our competitors and our rivals. As part of its strategy, a firm needs to specify some detailed actions. It needs to specify, for example, how it's going to improve its financial performance, or how is it going to strengthen its competitive position, or how is it going to gain sustainable competitive advantage over its market rivals. So there's quite a number of things that a strategy actually assists an organisation with. We need to be able to identify what a company's strategy is going to look for. So a company's strategy needs to look for a pattern of actions and also business approaches that are going to define how the company does business. They might be actions to strengthen the firm's bargaining position or to improve its sales or its market share, how it might embark on producing a new product or changing the service offering it has. All of those things form part of an organisation's strategy. I'd like to spend a few minutes now having a look at a case study company. And the company that I'd like you all to think about is Starbucks. And we're going to have a little bit of a look as to what Starbucks' strategy actually is. Now, we're all familiar with Starbucks. We've seen Starbucks on many street corners selling tea and coffee and a few other bits and pieces. So what are some of the key elements about Starbucks' strategy? There's several things. Starbucks always trains its baristas to serve a very wide variety of not just normal coffee, but specialty coffee that will satisfy individual customer preferences. Starbucks also tend to emphasize the ambience of the store and the elevation of the customer experience. So it's not just, here's a cup of coffee, go have it. They're trying to get that whole experience happening for the customers. Starbucks tends to purchase very top quality coffee beans to try and enhance the quality of their product and thereby also enhance the customer experience. And they're also very big on corporate responsibility. They take that very seriously. And in one of our later modules, we're going to learn a lot more about corporate social responsibility. So what we see Starbucks doing is that they're trying to fully exploit their growing power and their name in the marketplace. They're trying to exploit the image that they've created over time to further enhance their competitive advantage. I'd like to just have a little bit of a think about this concept of competitive advantage and what it really means and what it requires. In order for a company to have a competitive advantage, it actually means that it has to meet all of its customers' needs more effectively or better than somebody else. So they either have to provide a better level of service, a better product, or they have to provide it at a lower cost than one of their competitors. So these are some of the kinds of things that would set an organisation apart from its competitors. And then if we take that one step further and think about sustainable competitive advantage, that actually requires that, as well as doing all of those things we talked about a moment ago, it requires that the company gives buyers lasting reasons to prefer your products to that of a competitor's. Let's just change our focus now to having a look at the basic strategic approaches that are available to a company. There's several of them. They can be a low-cost provider, or they could be what we call a focused low-cost provider, or a best-cost provider, or they could focus on differentiation or broad differentiation. So we're going to look at each of these 5 basic strategic approaches a little bit more as we go along today. Let's talk a little bit more about gaining sustainable competitive advantage now. A company will gain a sustainable competitive advantage if it develops a particular kind of expertise and competitive capabilities that its rivals find very difficult to copy or match. So they've got to do something that their rivals can't do. And that puts the constant quest for sustainable competitive advantage at centre stage of the strategy. So whenever we're thinking about those things, we have to think whatever we do has to be really difficult for our competitors to copy, because that makes sure that your strategy remains sustainable. When we set a strategy, it's not just a set and forget. You've probably heard that term. What that means is this: because things are always changing in the marketplace, market conditions are changing, technology is changing, competitors are moving in and out of the marketplace, buyers' needs are shifting, there's different opportunities in the marketplace. Because of all of those things, we can't just write a strategy once and then never revisit it. As any of those things change, we need to be able to adapt and adjust and modify our strategy so that we remain relevant. So a company's strategy is actually a blend of proactive initiatives and reactive initiatives. So proactive initiatives are where the company decides that this is the way it wants to go, this is what it's going to do, whereas reactive things are when the company goes back and tweaks its strategy and makes adjustments as a result of these changing market conditions, for example, that we mentioned a few moments ago. Let's have a look now between the relationship between the strategy and the business model of an organisation. We mentioned at the outset that an organisation needs both. They need to have a strategy and they need to have a business model. So what we're going to look at now is what the relationship is between those. So the strategy gives you the basic approaches, okay? Whereas the business model actually tells you what are you going to do to succeed or to implement this strategy. So what actions do you have to do? If part of your strategy is about, say, gaining more customers, what are you going to do to get those additional customers? If your strategy is about increasing your profitability, what are you actually going to do to increase your profitability? That's what your business model is going to tell you. So a firm's business model sets forth the logic for how the strategy is going to create value for the customers and how it's going to generate your revenue and realise your profits. So what are the components of a business model? First of all, the first component we have is the customer value proposition. So the customer value proposition is all about satisfying buyer wants and needs at a price that the buyer is actually happy with, a price that the buyer considers good value. The better the value that we provide, the lower the price, the more attractive our overall business proposition becomes to our customers. The next element of the business model is what we call the profit formula. When we talk about the profit formula, what we're talking about is what we refer to as V, the value provided to our customers, P, the price that we charge our customers, and C, the firm's cost. So the profit formula is a combination of those three things. The price that we charge to our customers brings in our revenue, the costs for the company are our expenses, and our customers will keep coming back if they think we're providing them good value. So with this in mind now, let's just go and have another look at a little case study to consolidate our learning in this area. And I'd like you to think about the company Amazon for a few minutes now. It was back in July of 2015 that Amazon actually became the world's greatest retailer by market value. Going back many years when Amazon first started, their first thing that they used to do was sell books. And then they moved into other things because technology started to evolve. People weren't reading books quite so much. They introduced the Kindle, where people could read a book online. And then continuing advancing technology has meant that Amazon now describes themselves as a national or multinational technology company who focus on e-commerce, not just on selling paper books. So that's quite a change in their strategy, and that's what we mean by tweaking their strategy. Not setting a strategy and forgetting it, but as technology evolves and market conditions change, they have to tweak their strategy to remain relevant. Let's see the next slide now about some further changes. What Amazon has done now, because they've gone into many more products that they're selling, they've actually now begun to acquire their own fleet of cargo planes so that they can deliver all of these packages to customers. So we can see there's been quite a change in Amazon's strategy, and we're going to look back at Amazon again later on. One thing that a company will always want to do is ask itself, is our strategy a winner? And that's what we're going to be looking at now. There's a 3-test model that will help a company actually answer the question as to whether their strategy is a winner. And the 3 tests are the competitive advantage test, the fit test, and the performance test. We're going to have a look at those and just see how those will help you analyse whether your strategy is actually a winner. When we talk about the fit test, what we mean is this. Does our strategy exhibit a fit with both the internal and the external aspects of the firm's dynamic situation? So as a company is changing, does our strategy still fit? Is it meeting all of the changes that are going on? When we talk about the competitive advantage test, what we mean is this. Does it help the firm achieve a sustainable competitive advantage? And finally, the performance test is all about, will our strategy help us so that our performance is superior to that of a competitor's, in as much as it will provide us with better profitability and better competitive strengths and maybe even a greater market share. We're going to have a look at what we refer to as the strategy making and the strategy executing process next. So we've already talked a little bit about the strategy making process. So that's when we're developing our strategic vision, our mission, and our core values. And then we set our objectives and they come through in our business model. And then after we've got all of that worked out, we actually need to execute our strategy and monitor how successful our execution is being. And we're going to talk about 5 different stages of this process for a little while now. So the first stage is all about developing a strategic vision. So a company needs to develop this vision and this mission and the core values. Let's just reflect about what we mean about each of those things. A strategic vision, what does that do? It delineates management's aspirations, if you like. It provides direction to the question, where are we going? So it sets out the rationale for the direction that the organisation is trying to take. And for a strategic vision to be successful, you'll usually find that it uses quite distinctive and specific language. It's not just all about what we call motherhood statements, but they're very specific statements and concepts. When we actually word a vision statement, there's several things that we should do and several things that we shouldn't do. For example, we should be graphic and specific, not vague. We should always be very focused and we shouldn't use overly broad language. We want our vision to be quite inspiring. We don't want it to sound bland and uninteresting. It's very good that we be quite specific and not too generic. And it's really good if we can actually make it memorable instead of making it something that people will forget. So let's have a look at a couple of examples of vision statements next. What we've got here is a few examples of some vision statements now that we're going to have a look at. Let's have a look at this one here of Whole Foods. What you'll see is that there's just a whole paragraph of writing here. There seems to be nothing dreadfully inspiring there. It seems to be quite long. If you have a look at the exact wording in there, you'll see that there are some forward-looking paragraphs and sentences in there, which is good because a vision should be forward-looking, not backward-looking. And I guess it makes business sense, but the worst thing is it's just far too long. And because it's so long, it's not what we call memorable. Someone would read that and go, yeah, so by the time they get to the end, they've forgotten what the beginning said, right? It's nowhere near concise enough. So let's have a look at another example now. One that I like to look at is Nike. Nike's strategic vision, or the vision statement, says, Nike fosters a culture of invention. We create products, services and experiences for today's athlete while solving problems for the next generation. If you have a body, you are an athlete. Okay, so if we think about that, it's much shorter than our last one, isn't it? So it's a lot more memorable. It's easier for people to remember. It's forward-looking again. It talks about what Nike intends to do, and it talks about their core values. It fosters a culture of invention, solving problems for the next generation. So it's got some good things in it, but it's also got a few shortcomings in it. It's a little bit vague. It's perhaps not quite as detailed or focused as it could be, but the length of it is very much better. So when we're putting together a vision statement, what we need to do is try and encapsulate all of those really important points. We need it to keep focused, we need it to be forward-looking, we need it to be memorable. And generally speaking, as a general rule, they say that if we want it to be memorable, we should try to keep it to a maximum of 100 words. So you might actually like to think about how you could take the Whole Foods mission statement, for example, and shrink that down to 100 words and see if it's actually a better vision statement then. The next thing I'd like to look at is why a sound, well-communicated strategic vision actually matters. Why is it important? Why should we bother with it? The reason it's really important is this. If you have to put a vision down on paper in a clear and concise way, that means you have to have it clearly in your mind. You have to be very focused and really understand it. And that's the good thing about it. Because it's so clear in your mind then and so focused, it actually helps the organisation prepare for the future because you have got it so clearly in your mind. So what's the difference between a vision and a mission? A vision talks about the firm's aspirations, okay? What they'd like to do, whereas the firm's mission describes the scope and the purpose of its present business. So it talks about who we are, what we do, why we're here, and that kind of thing. So there is a difference between the vision and the mission of an organisation. So let's spend a few moments now talking about developing the mission statement of a company. Again, a mission statement should use very specific language to give the firm its own unique identity. It should describe the firm's current business purpose. So like I said, the who we are, what we do, and why we're here. And it needs to focus on describing the firm's business, not on making a profit. That will come if we do our business well. So describe the firm's business, not how it's going to make a profit. So if we had to look at an ideal mission statement, what would we find? We would find that the ideal mission statement actually identifies the firm's product or services. It would specify the buyer needs that it seeks to satisfy. It identifies the different customer groups within the market. It also would specify an approach that customers would find pleasing. And very importantly, the mission statement would set the firm apart from the competitors or the rivals and would clarify also who the stakeholders are of the business. So what I'd like you to think about now is, where do these core values that we've spoken about fit in this overall scheme of things? The core values are what we refer to as the beliefs and the traits of the company. What are the behavioural norms of the company? What are employees expected to do? What are employees expected to do in the way of how they behave while they're at work? That's the core values of an organisation. And they become an integral part of the firm's culture. And then that culture should flow through and match what the firm says in its vision and in its mission. What I'd like to do next is just have a look at a few examples of mission statements and how they link with core values. So we've got this company called Patagonia, and their mission statement is build the best product, cause no unnecessary harm, use business to inspire and implement solutions to the environmental crisis. So from that mission statement, we should get quite a flavour as to what their core values are. For example, they're talking about the best product. So obviously quality is one of their core values. They're talking about integrity, relationships that are built on integrity and respect. And they also talk about implementing solutions to the environmental crisis. So that tends to indicate that they have, as one of their core values, concern about the environment. And they don't appear to be bound by convention because they talk about being innovative. So they're not necessarily afraid to step outside of conventional bounds. Okay? So how does all of this fit together, I guess, is the question. Let's have a look at stage 2 of our strategy making, strategy execution process, and that will help us see a little bit further how these things all fit together. And stage 2 was all about setting objectives. So what's the purpose of setting objectives? What the objectives do is they convert the vision and the mission into specific, measurable and challenging and timely performance targets for a company. So to focus the efforts and to align actions throughout the organisation, we need these objectives. These objectives also serve as measuring sticks or yardsticks, if you like, for being able to track a firm's performance and its progress later on. And they're also very good in as much as they can provide motivation and inspire employees to put in greater levels of effort. So objectives are all about an organisation's performance targets. Now, when we have objectives, we need to be careful of a couple of things. We need to be careful that these objectives aren't too easy to reach, or we have to make sure that those objectives aren't too difficult to reach. They've got to be stretch objectives, but they still have to be able to be met. So there's that balance again between not stretch enough or too much of a stretch. Too much of it. I'd like to just have a look at some of the characteristics of strategic intent now. Strategic intent actually indicates the firm's intent to making quantum gains in competing against key rivals. It involves establishing performance targets that are actually going to help the company use its resources in such a way as to energise its workforce to make sure that they reach these objective targets over time. And those objectives and that intent is going to have to be sustained and sometimes consist of some aggressive actions as we go, if in fact we're going to need to take market share away from our competitors or our rivals. So as I mentioned before, objectives need to promote a little bit of stretch. So in other words, they have to make us try and just do a little bit better, move just a little bit further than sitting in our comfort zone. That's what we mean by a stretch objectives. It just has to push the firm to be a little bit more innovative, a little bit more inventive, just so that actually performs up to its very highest level. It gives the firm a bit more of an intentional focus. It becomes more real. They don't just sit there and think, oh, I can meet all of these objectives with my eyes shut. That's no good. What we want is we want the firm to say, right, I've really got to work to get this. Okay? That's the kind of objective that we're talking about. So there's two kinds of objectives that a firm can set. It can set financial objectives and it can set strategic objectives. So let's have a look at what both of these are. Financial objectives are just the objectives for financial performance. So if you like, they're internally focused on a company's operations. What kind of profit target do we have? What revenue targets do we have? What cost targets do we have? whereas strategic objectives are all about a firm's goals related to marketing and its competitive position. And they're externally focused, not internally focused like financial objectives. So let's have a look at some examples now of financial objectives. I gave you a few earlier on, but I've got a few more here. For example, an X% increase in annual revenue, or an annual dividend increase of X%, profit margins of a certain percent, or increased shareholder value because our share price will go up. So they're the kind of things that we mean when we talk about financial objectives, but they always have to be specific and they need to be measurable. Let's have a look at some examples of strategic objectives now. So winning an X% of market share, achieving lower overall costs than rivals, or having a broader or deeper technological capability than our rivals, having a wider product line than our rivals. So there's some examples of strategic objectives, but you'll see that they are still quite specific and they are still measurable. And that's really important, because if those objectives aren't measurable, how are we going to know if we've met them or not? We have to be able to measure them to be able to do that. When we're setting our strategy and then our business model, setting all of our objectives, that will undoubtedly lead to better financial performance. But good financial performance is not the only thing that's important. And the reason I say that is this. Financial performance, we don't know if we've performed well or not financially until sometime down the track. Financial performance is what we call a lagging indicator. So we sell our product and we operate for the whole year, then at the end of the financial year is when we put together our financial statements, our annual statements. So we have to wait sometimes quite a long time until we know whether our financial performance has improved or not. So we need something a little bit more than just good financial performance. So good strategic performance is what we call a leading indicator. So it will tell us about the increasing capability of a firm to deliver in the future. And that's why those two are so important and sit so well together. We've got financial, which is the lagging indicator, and then we've got the strategic, which is the leading indicator. So if we've got it right, if we have a good strategy, all those leading indicators are fine, then the lagging indicators should also be good. And when we set objectives, they can't just be for the very top level of the organisation. Objectives need to be set for every level of the organisation. It needs to break down performance targets for each individual organisational unit. And some organisations take that right down to setting objectives for individual people in individual departments. And that just makes sure that everybody is on the same page and working to exactly the same goals within the organisation. So we're going to go back to Amazon, our case study company now, and we'll just have a look at some of their company objectives and see how they compare to what we've been learning about. In 2017, in their annual report, Amazon listed some of their objectives. One of them was obsess over customers. Okay? So that was one of their strategic objectives, if you like. And they said that they'd worked hard to expand their business and their infrastructure. They'd improved their sales and service levels. And all of this was happening because they had that strategic objective of obsessing over their customers. The features of their strategy, they actually had what we call a broad low-cost strategy. And that links innovation with their three core products. And Amazon now call their three core products e-commerce, web services. And so they've moved right out of their original traditional books objective, if you like. So what they're doing now is they're looking at meeting the needs of the converging online, retail, entertainment and computer markets. So it's quite a shift in their objectives. You might actually like to have a look at the 2017 annual report of Amazon and just have a bit of a read of the CEO's report at the front to see exactly what they say about the objectives of their company. That brings us up to stage 3 of our strategy executing process. And stage 3 is what we call crafting the strategy. So what do we mean by crafting the strategy? We mean this. Crafting the strategy addresses a series of strategic hows. Okay? It requires us to choose among things such as alternative alliances. It promotes actions to do certain things and maybe not other things, to choose one thing rather than choosing the same thing as our competitor. It's a collaborative team effort that involves managers in various positions at all organisational levels. So when we craft the strategy, it can't just be done at the very senior level of the organisation. It needs to use people at all levels within the organisation, so that, because everybody brings a slightly different focus. So if it's going to be really successful, the more input we have at the different levels of the organisation, the more likely it is to be a comprehensive process and actually a really good strategy in the end. And then, if we put together the firm's vision, its mission, its core values and its objectives, all of that into one, that's when we have the chosen strategy for the organisation. So you can see how all of those things together add up to equal the complete strategic plan of the organisation. So that's all about the development. Now we have to talk about this strategy execution process, because you can have a brilliant strategy, but if it's not executed well, it's not going to be successful. So in order to make sure that the execution process is successful, we need to make sure that there's a structure within the organisation that supports the strategy execution. So in other words, we have to have staff who have the right skill sets and the correct expertise. We have to have the correct resources supporting these staff to make sure that it all works. The correct policies to facilitate it, and the whole organisation work effort needs to be focused in the right direction, in the same direction, to make sure that our strategy execution process is successful. There also has to be a proper way of managing this strategy. Somebody has to be, if you like, pulling the ropes. So there needs to be people at the top that are actually leading this whole execution process and creating the company culture that is needed to actually be successful. So there needs to be strong internal leadership within the company. And if a company is lacking in this strong internal leadership, then the strategy execution process is also likely to be floundering and not be successful. The directors in an organisation also have an important role when it comes to strategy. Ultimately, the directors of a company are charged with the responsibility to look after shareholders' interests. Now, if you're going to look after shareholders' interests, you have to have a company that's sustainable and profitable, because that will increase the value to the shareholders. So therefore it follows that the directors need to set a strategy for a company that's going to enable that company to be a sustainable, profitable company into the future. And that also includes tweaking the strategy in response to various changing business conditions that we learnt about earlier in our module. So I'd like you now to reflect back over the concepts that we've learnt in this first model. And as you do that, perhaps something that might be interesting for you is to choose a company that you're interested in, have a look at their website, download their annual report from their website, and then go through that annual report and see if you can find what the company's strategy is, if you can work out what the which one of the 5 basic approaches they seem to be using to set it apart from its competitors, and also see if you can find that company's customer value proposition. And if you can find all of those things, that will be excellent revision for you for our first module. Okay, well that concludes our Module A for today. I'd like to thank you for going through the material, and I hope that you have actually found it to be interesting and of value to you. So until we see you next week, take some time to reflect and review the things that we've learned.